Hey, welcome. A few of us concerned citizens concerned about our Constitution have gathered today to lobby the State House. We're here at the Massachusetts State House. Today is Tuesday, January 7th, 2014, New Year, and we've gone around to the offices of our state reps and state senators and to the proponents of House Resolution number 3190. And basically this is calling for Massachusetts to call for another constitutional convention. Why is that dangerous? Our founders gave us basically two ways to amend the Constitution, and we've always amended the Constitution one by one. The first way, the better way, where you can restrict, basically the subject to one item. A good example of this is the 17th Amendment. I would not be in favor of that. That is for the direct election of senators. It was just one item, and you have 2/3 of the states which call for the resolution, and then 3/4 must pass. That is a safe way to amend the Constitution. The other way is to hold a constitutional convention, and then you have all these different states, all these different groups with a whole laundry list of ways to change our Constitution, and we feel that is very, very dangerous. Here to speak more on that is the Regional Director of the John Birch Society, as well as the Director of Camp Constitution, Mr. Hal Shurtleff. Hal, welcome.
Hey, Tom, thank you very much. Yes, folks, I want to thank all of you that came out today. There's actually two bills or resolutions in both the House and the Senate here in Massachusetts, and I'll make reference to it. Senate 1727 and House 3190. Both of these are calling for an Article 5 convention, a con for short, like the banner down below here says con. A lot of people get confused with that terminology. We're discussing an Article 5 convention, Article 5 under the U.S. Constitution. And these resolutions are very nebulous. Some resolutions in some states call for a specific amendment, but this one is sort of open-ended. But regardless of what they're calling for, the Constitution on Article 5, as Tom pointed out, there's two ways to amend the Constitution. The House and Senate, U.S. House and Senate, 2/3 can propose amendments. It goes to the states, 3/4 of the states, either by the legislature or by a ratifying committee. We can't forget that, because when the 18th Amendment was up for repeal, there were some dry states where they had no chance of ever passing, yet they had committees. Congress said we're going to have committees instead of the legislatures, and they were able to, even states like Utah that were pretty dry and would never have gone along with it. So the other way is where 2/3 of the states apply for an Article 5 convention. This is what they did here in Massachusetts. This is a resolution that's not passed yet. And then the states will convene this conference. We've never had one in the history of the United States Constitution. We had one under the Articles of Confederation, which has only been around at that point like 5 years, 1781, I believe. And so they had the convention, and we're very glad we got what we got, the U.S. Constitution. I don't think we have the same caliber of people, unfortunately, that may be at any future conference. And what this initial con did was they were there to amend the Articles of Confederation, but what they did was they said, we're not going to amend it, we're going to write a new one. And they changed the mode of ratification. At that point, you needed all 13 states, complete agreement. They said we'll only need 9. Now, under Article 5, where there's 3/4 of the states, and a lot of the folks who support one say, oh, the 3/4 of the states will never do anything stupid, they didn't do anything crazy. Really? Why do you think that would be the case? We like to think that, but 3/4 of the states can do the wrong thing, and Congress may say, you know what, there's some amendments we may want to get passed here, and they won't go through the states, the assemblies, so we'll have constitutional ratifying committees. So that sort of puts the power into the hands of special interests. The other thing, and Mark Levine, by the way, is one of the biggest supporters of this. He's a conservative, I think the term neoconservative would be more appropriate, talk show host. I listen to him on occasions, and I agree with a lot he has to say. On this one, I'm dead against it. He's convinced that the states will never ratify anything crazy, and that you can limit this. And he wrote in his book, The Liberty Amendments, he's got about 15 proposed amendments. The bottom line is, folks, you don't need a bunch of amendments. The Constitution isn't it flawed? the people who are taking oath to office, to swear up to that office, they're the ones that are flawed. So just adding a bunch of amendments to the Constitution where members of Congress and the executive branch and the Supreme Court routinely ignore it isn't the solution. But I want to point out that this isn't a left-right issue. There are people on both sides of the ideological spectrum. I'm with the John Birch Society, and since 1986 or so, we've been strongly against this. And we've worked with other groups, various groups over the years, to stop one with a lot of success. But this drive, and I've been involved myself since 1988, and I've never seen such a strong drive for one. And I want to point out, for those of you who are in the Levine's camp, that think this is a great thing, these amendments we propose are going to get us back under some kind of responsible government. There's an article in The Atlantic, and this article came out very recently, and it should be troubling to those of you who think that this Constitutional Convention can be kept to a minimum. It's, let me see, I'm trying to get the date of it. It's called the U.S. Needs a New Constitution. Here's how to write it. So you can reference this, just go to their website, I'm sure you can find it. They're telling us that our Constitution is obsolete, that nobody cares about it anymore, and when new countries or countries have new governments over the last 50 or 60 years, they don't even use our Constitution. So what's the big deal? And let's write a new one. And I can tell you, there's some organizations that have already written one. Rexford Tugwell's group back in the 1970s, early 80s has one. And what these folks want to do is have a sort of a parliamentary system. But our Constitution, folks, was not written, just say it was written for an agrarian culture with 3 or 4 million people. Our Constitution dealt with power and how men and women gravitate towards power and how you have to limit that government. So it may need a little, maybe it needs tweaking every so often, but I think it's pretty sound. The problem isn't the Constitution, as I said, it's the folks pushing it. So in Massachusetts, we are working very hard to wake up a lot of folks. We've been visiting legislators, and right here in Massachusetts, these two bills or resolutions were referred to the Veterans and Federal Affairs Committee, which, by the way, most of these resolutions around the country, similar committees in their states. And we think it may not pass. We've got some of the, some of the folks we spoke to today, although famous last words. We can never rest on our laurels. And I want to mention what we're doing. Passing out this article from the New American Magazine that came out in August that was examining Mark Levine's book and why a federal convention is a very, very bad idea. And by the way, this is available on the John Birch Society's New American website. You can download the article. We also have a 12-minute, it's a DVD, but we're giving out CDs. We're telling the legislators, look, on the way home, pop it in your CD player and listen to it. It's 12 minutes long, and it's a couple of legislators from Oklahoma and explaining how they successfully rescinded all of their state's calls, all of the old calls. Now, people will say, what's the head count? How many states have calls for con-con? How many states are needed? Well, you need 34 states, 2/3 of the states. And there may be enough if you add up all of the calls that go back to the late 1700s for various reasons, because these calls don't die. There's no sunset clause. So as far as we believe, we were able to get a lot of states to rescind all of their old calls. So it's hard to say. I think Congress is not acknowledging any of the old calls, but they'll acknowledge the new calls. Last year, there was a drive compact for the states, led by the Goldwater Institute. And we actually were so successful in derailing that, even in the home state of Arizona. So that really got nowhere. That was sort of a convoluted thing. But over the last 30-plus years, there's been a drive for this, and we're very convinced that we can stop this. And I'm hoping that people who may be sort of a knee-jerk reaction, and by the way, when I first heard about this, I thought it was a great idea too, until I examined the people behind it. In Massachusetts, in 2011, there was a conference on the Constitutional Convention led by Harvard Law School, not exactly a bastion of constitutional conservatism. And Professor Larry Lessig, who was the man that was sort of chaired it, and the National Tea Party, which is sort of a Beltway Tea Party group. And my thinking is, I'll work with people on the left side of the spectrum, to stop it. But why would people on the right and the left think that this convention, the outcome, would benefit them? Does Mark Levine think that Larry Lessig and all the folks that back his his group, you think they're gonna do Mark Levine's bidding and vice versa? And what does Larry Lessig know that Mark Levine doesn't want to know or refuses to understand? So also up in Maine, just to give you an example of other groups, there's a left-wing group up in Maine that's pushing for a constitutional convention. And this way, they want to have an amendment that will say that corporations cannot be considered a legal person in the court. And that may or may not be a legitimate thing to do, but you don't need an amendment for it. Just like you don't need a flag burning amendment, you don't need a balanced budget amendment. You just need members of Congress that will simply, uphold the Constitution. So with that, I want to thank you, and we have all the references if you want to contact us at jbs.org. In Massachusetts, we have a Facebook page called, well actually it's a nationwide Facebook page called Stop the Constitutional Convention, and you get a lot of updated information, a lot of downloads there, resources. And with that, I want to thank you, and I'll turn it back over to my friend here, Tom.
Thank you, Hal. We have with us today another authority on the Constitution, on the Bill of Rights, and specifically the Second Amendment, but he's here to speak on this, Mr. Daniel McGonigle, Daniel Vincent McGonigle, also a veteran of lobbying this Massachusetts State House several years back when we were able to defeat mandatory vaccination bill. Dan was instrumental and led us in that fight. Dan? I'm sorry, I should also say he's also the author of a new book, which is, it's a long title.
Execute the laws to restore the Republic.
Execute the laws to restore the public. Thanks,
The
Dan.
Republic, yes.
The Republic.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Tom Moor, and thank you, Hal Shurtleff. I've worked with both these gentlemen in the past. I've worked on several projects with Hal Shurtleff, a great 21st century patriot, and also Tom Moor. And I just want to say a few words about an article and make a point on an article written by Dr. Edwin Vieira Jr., PhD, JD. The article is entitled "Enforcement, Not Amendment, is the Answer." And thank you. And just a few comments from this article by Dr. Vieira, who is who I consider to be the top constitutional scholar in the country. And he does mention Mark Levin in this article, along with Timothy Baldwin, and this is kind of a rebuttal to Levin, and he expounds further on that. And his question, he asks, is exactly how are the new amendments to be enforced? So the issue is enforcement, and the problem we have today is that the existing Constitution, Bill of Rights, and state constitutions are not being enforced. So that, and then we have Vieira's on-point question: how are the new amendments to be enforced, which are proposed by Lessig, Levin, etc.? So there is a clause in the Constitution, and it can be found at Article 1, Section 8, Clause 15. And I recommend, if you want to know how to enforce the Constitution, you go look that up in your pocket Constitution, and it will tell you how to do that. And it is an institution that needs to be restored, and it's enumerated in the state constitutions, in the Second Amendment, the 10th Amendment, the preamble, and Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 15 and 16. So the specific language to enforce the Constitution is in Clause 16. And this article, at the end of the video, the link will be posted at the end of the video to this article by Dr. Vieira on enforcement, not amendment, is the answer. Thank you very much. Thank you, Hal. Thank you, Tom.
All right, do we have any other citizens who would wish to speak on this today?
Let me just further encourage the people who are maybe listening to this on on C-SPAN, not C-SPAN, but somewhere on YouTube or wherever else, that this is a very critical issue. And you are citizens, you're the bosses. These folks at the state houses, they're your employees. And
The Constitution begins with we the people.
That's right. And we can stop this and many other things that are going on. We can promote good things, but it begins with you folks. It begins with you who might be watching this. Get to understand how your government works. If you're not sure, find out who your state rep is. Many of these state reps will sign on to this thinking that everybody agrees with them because he hasn't heard or she hasn't heard anything else. So it's important that you let your voice be heard. Make that phone call, visit that state house, or even easier, because some states, state capitals are an 8-hour drive, like Texas, you know. Here in Boston, it's a little easier. But get a hold of, most legislators have local offices. So visit their local office and let them know what you think on this issue and have the hard copy, and then follow up with a phone call or an email, probably both. A phone call is better. And get other people involved in your community as well.
Is there a date on this now?
What's that?
Is there a date on the legislation?
Well, if this particular resolution will die by the end of this session, so if they're not acting on it by November or December, it has to be resubmitted. We actually are going to resubmit a resolution to rescind all of Massachusetts' old calls for a Concord, going back to the 1800s, but we have to do it in the next session, 2015, the next. So some states, depending on state-by-state basis. So again, contact us on this very important issue. The Constitution is on the chopping block. That's how important this is. That's why good folks took the time from work to come up here and do this. This isn't just another issue that on top of 1,000 others. This is a critical issue. And it's under the radar to some extent. Although, as I mentioned a little earlier, I've never seen so much activity on this issue. Usually most people have no idea what you're talking about. You speak to the aides, they look at you like deer in the headlight. They're looking at a headlight. What's this about? But more people know about it than before. And there's a lot of good people in our, on the Liberty side that buy into this, and it's very frustrating because we have to, and they get upset with me or with Tom, and some of them have said, look, examine the whole thing. Don't just hear and get a knee-jerk reaction. Look into the whole issue. And there are people on the left. And I like Professor Lessig. I've read some of his material. He's a very brilliant guy. And while I disagree with a lot of what he says, I agree with some of the reasons why he wants to have, fix this thing. But the solution is wrong. And again, at this conference in Harvard in 2011, they wouldn't let me participate, or anyone from. There was only one person who spoke out against the CONCON. And this was supposed to be an event off, both sides of the spectrum, but both sides of the issue. Only Professor Lawrence Tribe, a colleague of Larry Lessig, who's been a long-time opponent of this. Unfortunately, he's not the activist like Larry Lessig is, and he gets the bill, the resolution introduced, he gets hearings on it and so forth. So again, take action on this. Get a hold of us, jbs.org, go to the website, you can give us your contact information. If you're in Massachusetts, Friends of the Greater Boston John Birch Society on Facebook. You can email me. My name is Hal Shurtleff. Just reverse it, shurtleffhal@aol.com. I've been in touch with people all over the country on this subject, and we have people working all over the country to oppose it. So
one thing I can say, and Daniel can certainly attest to, about effective activism, and that is it only takes a small core group to shut something down. It takes a lot more to initiate something, but in terms of shutting down the SHOT bill, which was voted unanimously, it was engrossed into legislation, not passed, but unanimously engrossed into legislation. A core group of, I would say, about 12 people, led by Daniel McGonigle, shut that down so we wouldn't have a mandatory shot, one day. The other thing is, when you call your congressman in Boston, it doesn't just count for you.
State rep.
And your state rep, it doesn't count for you, it counts for many hundreds of people, the way they figure that. And when you go and visit them, it does make a huge impression. It actually does more than you think. So for those of you who think that that's a waste of time, I can tell you from experience in shutting these things down, it's not a waste of time. You can have a lot of impact, and hopefully everyone will call their state rep, their state senator. Thank you.
And one more thing, this is not a left-right issue. there are a lot of people on both sides of the spectrum pushing it. So if you're a conservative and your state rep or state senator is a very liberal, what have you, don't let that deter you from making that phone call. You should make the call anyway. Because as we're visiting people here, a lot of people on the liberal side aren't in favor of it either. So don't just give up without even trying. So again, we want to thank you for coming, and let's stop the con-con. Choose freedom, stop the con-con. Oh, by the way, that's also a Facebook page too, on the John Birch Society's national Facebook page. Choose freedom, stop the con-con. Thank you.
Thanks.